This morning I'll be reading from Psalm 82. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the orphan. Maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk around in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I say, you are gods, children of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you shall die like mortals and fall like any prince. Rise up, O God, judge the earth, for all the nations belong to you. I'll be reading as well from Luke chapter 10, verses 25 to 37. Just then a lawyer stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he said, what must I do to inherit eternal life? He said to him, what is written in the law? What do you read there? He answered, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And he said to him, you have given the right answer. Do this, and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell into the hands of robbers who stripped him, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, while traveling, came near him, and when he saw him, he was moved with pity. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, having poured oil and wine on them. Then he put him on his animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, gave them to the innkeeper, and said, take care of him, and when I come back, I will repay you whatever more you spend. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? He said. The one who showed him mercy. Jesus said to him, go and do likewise.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning. People are still awake. I like that. So in the summer on Sunday evenings, I like to take Sam out for a bit of a bike ride. We tend to go to Scotia Street because it's one of those streets, kind of like Wellington Avenue, that shuts down to vehicles. No vehicular traffic are allowed, or just one block. And so it's only supposed to be used by bikes and pedestrians on Sundays. Now I like going here because it's a lot safer for myself, but more so for Sam. If you've ever ridden bike with a kid's bike stroller behind it, you know how nerve-wrenching that can be. You end up clenching the bike grip so hard that by the end of it, you can barely open your hands. You're just stuck like this. And you're constantly looking over your shoulder, and you might end up with a sore back from doing that all the time. And overall, you're just a little afraid that a car is going to come a bit too close for comfort. And so it's just not a lot of fun, as an evening bike ride should be, and that's why I head down to Scotia Street, where there's no traffic. Anyways, a few weeks ago, I was out biking down Scotia Street on a Sunday evening, when up from behind me comes a car. I see it coming from a few blocks away, and since vehicles are supposed to travel only 1 block, I have no issue in putting out my hand like this as I'm biking and asking the guy to stop. He slows down as he pulls up beside me, and I politely remind him, you're only supposed to travel 1 block. He likely didn't hear me because he didn't roll down his window, but he probably understood what I was asking him to do because he replied with a burnout as he sped down the street even further. I'm pretty angry at this, but there's not much else I can do. He's long gone, and I'm on a bike. There's no way I'm going to catch up to him, especially with the stroller. So I just keep biking along with Sam, and as I keep biking, I pass 2 more roadblocks, those little signs that they often use for construction, that clearly state vehicles are restricted to 1 block of travel. So I pass by 2 more of those. And shortly after the second one, I see the same car that passed by me parked on the side of the road, and the driver is getting out of his car and heading towards a home. I slow down my bike and again remind him that vehicles are restricted to 1 block on Sundays. And this time he replies by saying, "Where's the badge?" As though I have no right in telling him what to do. Now I'm really angry, and I reply with saying, "I don't need a badge. I'm just trying to have a safe bike ride with my son." And I alluded to the fact that Scotia should be a safe place for families to bike on Sundays without having vehicles to worry about. And he keeps shouting back that I have no authority because I don't have a badge. And I keep saying that he has no right driving down Scotia like that and that he's the one breaking the law. Clearly, he was in the wrong, and therefore I was in the right. Now, after a few times of repeating ourselves, I realized that this was not going to go anywhere, and so I just biked away. Still, I'm not overly proud of how this situation went. It became a shouting match over who was right and who was wrong. I was still angry by the time I got home, and all I wanted to do was call the emergency police line and ask them to go patrol Scotia. All I wanted was for justice to be served. I wanted for this guy to be found guilty of the wrongs he did, and for him to fess up to what he did. After all, it was clearly him who was in the wrong. Now, this morning, as has been mentioned a number of times, we're going to be talking about justice and what our role is in serving justice. And so I described a scenario to you where I wanted for justice to be served. But then along with justice, we'll actually be looking at mercy. And these two tend to go together in messages, and we hear a lot about justice and mercy together. And at the same time, when we actually think about them a bit closer, they seem to conflict with one another. Justice is typically about finding fairness, who is right, who is wrong, and mercy is about showing compassion and forgiveness. So how can one truly be merciful if what one is seeking is justice? Now, typically our response is to say, well, it's a balance or like a delicate dance where we try to find justice and be fair while still showing mercy to all the parties involved. Now, what I find very ironic about this is that by saying it's a balance, we're actually still following the rules of justice rather than mercy. Let me explain a bit further. So if you do a quick Google image search of justice and mercy, what you'll find is this image of a balance scale, or it's also on your bulletin cover, with justice on one side and mercy on the other. And what's ironic about this is that this balance scale is also the image that represents the judicial court systems. So again, justice is about finding balance. It's about being fair, like the concept of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Except in an act of mercy, we've kind of monetized the value of eyes and teeth. But again, this is ironic because it is this very image of a balance scale, which is being used for justice, that is also being used for the justice-mercy conversation. And what this shows is that what we are really seeking above all else is justice. When we are talking about mercy, we still tend to do so in terms of justice. And if that is the case, then where does mercy actually come in? How do we truly show mercy if it is still being done in terms of justice? Now, what I want to propose, and what we'll get into a bit further here this morning, is that a Christ-centered approach to justice is not about finding fairness and balancing the scales, but rather a Christ-centered approach to justice is first and foremost about showing mercy. It is about finding justice through mercy, rather than extending mercy through justice. And to do this, we're first going to look a bit closer again at what justice means to us in our society. How do we view justice, and what implications does this have on us and how we view others? And then following this discussion, we'll look at a Christ-centered approach to justice, which again is through mercy. And then to close, we'll look at the passages that were read for us this morning as examples of how to show mercy. So to begin, let us first look a bit closer at how we understand justice. And to reiterate, we typically understand justice to be about fairness, or a balancing of the scales. And the Old Testament actually alludes to this idea of justice. As already mentioned, Exodus 21 talks about justice as an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, so on and so forth. Now today, we look at this and we just say, well, that's barbaric. We can't do that. But that was how justice was served. And in fact, it could be said that this is the fairest way to balance the scales. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. It's fair. However, mercy has been added to the justice system in that we've monetized the value of our appendages. So instead of an eye for an eye, it's become X number of dollars for an eye. Or if you can't afford that, well, then you serve X amount of time for an eye. And in doing this, we've only added mercy to the justice system as an afterthought, rather than having true mercy as our starting point. And furthermore, this system actually has the potential to further oppress the victim, while at the same time it has very little consequence on the offender. So in essence, under this system, if you have money, you can do whatever you want. It's kind of like this. Oh, you accidentally gouged someone's eye out? Well, just throw some money at it and make it go away. And then on top of this, an easy way to make more money is through the ongoing oppression of others. Thus, the rich get richer and the oppressed get more oppressed. And true mercy is actually nowhere to be found. Very few people are coming alongside the oppressed individual to help them out. And instead, we just leave that to the courts to decide how much money they should get out of this ordeal. And if the oppressor is rich, then again, there's very little consequence. And so while our justice system says it is about fairness, while still showing some semblance of mercy, there is very little that is actually fair about it. And then another thing that justice seems to focus on is who is right and who is wrong. And this is exactly what I was talking about with my opening illustration of me biking down Scotia Street. I had every right to be biking down the street and asking the driver to not be driving there at that time. I was right, he was wrong. Now, it could be argued that this is what justice is about. It's about being justified in your assessment that you are right and therefore the other is wrong. But I find that when we do this, what we are actually doing is we are being divisive. We are dividing the world. Issues become about us and them, or I and the other. And when we start to think in these terms, then we start to think that I am in the right, or that I am the better person. And in doing this, we actually dehumanize the other person. We are saying that they are less than because they are not us. And you can see that this understanding becomes very divisive, and yet it also influences us as Christians. We see this play out in Christianity through legalism. And we start to define who is in and who is out. And it all depends on whether or not others agree with what I believe. And although we generally won't say it overtly, what we are saying kind of goes something like this. Oh, that's what you believe? Well, you might want to go and check out that church down the street then. Maybe go check out that Anglican or even that Catholic church. And then if you're lucky, you might be saved. Or if God's feeling very merciful that day, then you might be good. But if you want to be sure about your faith or about your where you're going to end up, you might want to just stay here. You should probably change what you believe and attend this church because we got it right. It's as though we believe we have a complete hold on who God is. or a complete understanding of who God is. We say, yeah, God, I've got a close relationship with you. I know who you are. And if I know who you are, then clearly I am right, and therefore the other must be wrong. But if we are saying this, then what we are actually saying is that we are God. For the only person that can truly and fully know God is God. We as humans only know God in part. And so if we say that we do know God in full and that we have the complete grasp on who God is, what we are actually saying is that we are God. And this is the problem with viewing justice in terms of who is right and who is wrong, or in terms of us and them, or who is in and who is out. It's actually a form of idolatry, where we are saying that we are God because we are right. Now, if we take a break from this for a second and direct our attention over to our focus, you'll see right in the center, it says, as the Spirit-led people of God. Now, this being Spirit-led implies that it is actually God's way that is the right way. It's not our way that's right, but it is God's way that's right. And we want to follow along with that and be Spirit-led in God's way. And so when we look to God for justice, we actually see that justice isn't really about deciding who is right and who is wrong, and it's not about making things fair, but rather it is about setting things right. And yes, setting things right does imply that there is something wrong, and so it could be said that this view on justice is still about looking at who is right, who is wrong, except from God's perspective, we're all wrong. When we view justice as God setting things right, we are reminded that we as humans are all wrong. We are all sinful. And we are equally in need of God's saving grace, every one of us. And then what is more is that since we are all equally wrong and equally guilty, we are all equally deserving of the consequences. After all, it's only fair. The fair consequence that we deserve is death. In Romans 6:23, we read that the wages of sin is death. If we want to stick to the rules of justice, of what's fair and of what's right and wrong, well, then death is what we all deserve. And however, here is the good news, or the gospel, is that God has already begun to set things right. And God did this through the most amazing act of mercy one has ever seen, in that God came to earth as Jesus Christ and died in our place. Jesus bore upon himself the full cost of our sin, and in doing so, justice was served. Things were set right. Now, that is not to say that everything is now as it should be, but rather this was just the start of God's justice, of setting things right. But still, we are left with a different model of justice, a model that actually begins with showing mercy, a model that actually recognizes the humanity of each individual and the goodness of God's creation, a model that invites us to get involved with God's work rather than just pointing fingers at one another. So to recap justice, our role is not to balance the scales and find fairness, nor is it about pointing fingers and deciding who is right and who is wrong. Rather, justice is about setting things right in the world so that the world is as God intended it to be, or the way God created it. And the good news is that God has already begun this work through Jesus Christ. Jesus balanced the scales and then some, to the point that he actually did away with this whole balancing system of justice. Yes, we do deserve death, but through God's system of justice, God showed us mercy. And so this is the example that we as Christians have for justice. It begins with showing mercy. Now I need to pause here for a second and go over some things. Up to this point, we've covered that we shouldn't be pointing fingers and deciding who is right and who is wrong, but rather we should be showing mercy. And if you take these things at face value, some might conclude that anything goes, that we do whatever we want. After all, if justice is first and foremost about showing mercy, then mercy should and perhaps will be shown to me. Therefore, I can do whatever I want. You can quickly see how taking this understanding at face value can actually pervert justice. And so a bit more still needs to be said. And so let me make it clear. No, showing justice through mercy does not mean that anything goes, nor does it mean that we do not judge. And to clarify this, let us take a look at the passages read for us this morning. So Psalm 82, verses 2 to 4 reads, "How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Rather, give justice to the weak and the orphan, maintain the right of the lowly and the destitute, rescue the weak and the needy, and deliver them from the hand of the wicked." So this passage here is not saying do not judge, but rather it is setting out the example of how we should judge and how we should show justice through mercy. Notice this passage is not about trying to balance the scales and make things fair, nor is it about pointing fingers at who is right and who is wrong, but it's also not saying that anything goes and therefore just let people do what they want because God has shown them mercy. Rather, this passage highlights what justice through mercy is all about and what it looks like. Justice through mercy is about recognizing when others have been wronged or oppressed, and then it is about walking alongside them and supporting them in their journey. And so, yes, there still is a recognition of right and wrong, but it's not about who is right and who is wrong. Rather, it's about what is right and what is wrong. We are called to judge between what is right and what is wrong, not who is right and who is wrong. But then in judging between these, we are then further invited to do justice by showing mercy to those who have been wronged. And moving on to Luke 10, verses 25 to 37. And again, this is the parable of the Good Samaritan. This passage also highlights this idea of judging between what is right and what is wrong, and then showing mercy to the oppressed or to those in need. But this passage also highlights another important aspect when it comes to judging, which is to not show partiality to those who think and act like you. Now, you may have heard this before, but the Jewish people and the Samaritan people did not really get along well. They had some intense rivalries, and while they lived together somewhat peacefully, they were not exactly friends. It was assumed that you do not associate with the other. And yet here in this passage, Jesus is highlighting that it is the Samaritan that is acting neighborly towards the injured Jew. Being neighborly by showing mercy crosses boundaries. It eliminates the divide between us and them that we so often create, and it instead becomes we. We are all equally human, and we are all equally a part of God's creation, and we are all equally in need of God's mercy. And so again, what this passage highlights is that justice is not about showing mercy only to those who think like us, act like us, look like us, or are one of us. But rather, justice is about showing mercy to anyone who is in need, regardless of what they might think, how they might act, or even what they believe. And so to end, I actually want to leave you with a challenge based on this parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, I know we can all think of people who we just do not get along with, either an individual, a people group, or even an organization or a political party. Let's just pause for a moment and think of such a person. Now, I'm not actually going to pause that long because I know as soon as I mentioned it, you all had someone in mind. I had someone in mind as soon as I wrote this challenge for myself. And so I'm not going to pause very long to let you think, because I know you can all think of someone, and who knows, it might even be me. I hope not, but we'll see. Anyways, you have that person in your mind, and when you think about this person, you're more than likely focusing on the things that divide you, the things that you don't agree with, and the things that just get on your nerves about this person. Now, let's take a moment and just set those things aside, and then my challenge to you, for you is this. Instead of focusing on those things that divide you, first off, recognize their humanity. Recognize that they were created by God just as you were, and that they are therefore loved by God just as you are. And in essence, recognize their humanity and recognize their goodness, both of which are because God made it so. And then, secondly, in recognizing that, and then instead of focusing on the things that divide you, think of how you might show mercy to such a person. Now, it might mean praying for them regularly. It might mean doing some small act of kindness for them. It might mean helping them through a tough time, or it might mean sitting down with them, having coffee, and learning more about them. But this is my challenge for you. Think of such a person, and instead of focusing on your differences, think about how you might show mercy to them. And in showing them mercy, I think we'll also start to find justice. Not a justice that is about finding fairness or pointing fingers at who is right and who is wrong, but a Christ-centered justice that is about joining with God in making things right in this world. And again, that starts by showing mercy. So let's pray. Divine Judge, you framed the earth with love and mercy and declared it good. Yet we, desiring to justify ourselves, judge others harshly, without knowledge or understanding. Keep us faithful in prayer, that we may be filled with the knowledge of your will, and not ignore or pass by another's need, but plumb the depths of love in showing mercy. In your name we pray. Amen.